I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we investigate the crime spree of Lois Riess. What drove this worm farmer to murder? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, with my stupendous co-host, Alice.
You know what that reminds me of? You know, like those cartoonish stickers you get as a kid when you finish like a class? You're stupendous.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you for that.
That's your sticker for the day,
Stupendous.
Alice. Congratulations. You are stupendous.
You can't spell stupendous without stupid. That's not actually right, and I know that.
I don't think that's true.
I know.
Oh,
and
man.
therein lies the joke.
Therein lies the joke, exactly.
Oh, it's the worst when you have to explain your jokes.
Yeah. So, as you guys can probably already tell, this is going to be a fun one. You know, we do some of these stories, and they're really depressing, and they make us very sad. And look, there are sad things about the story we're going to do today. I mean, there are two dead people, and I don't want to make light of that fact, because I know the families are deeply affected by that. But you guys just got to get ready, because this is one of the weirdest stories that we have ever covered, and probably ever will cover. So if things get a little loopy, you'll know why. But before we get into that, I did want to read one of the reviews we got on Apple, because it's really my favorite review that we've gotten so far, and you guys will see why. So this is from Hopeful Future Prosecutor, and it says, "Love this. I've always enjoyed podcasts about both the legal system and true crime. I want to be a prosecutor as well, so I very much enjoy hearing the way you both think and delve into cases. With the whole pandemic and being out of school for 6 to 7 months, my motivation heading into my first year studying criminal justice was faltering, and this really helped reignite my passion. Keep doing what you're doing. I binged the first 20 episodes on my commute to and from work, and now I can't wait until each new one drops." Well, thank you very much, Hopeful Future Prosecutor, and I'm glad we could inspire you to continue doing what you're doing. We need folks like you out there, and just don't let the pandemic get you down. Don't let it keep you from your dreams.
Yeah.
That's all I got to say about that.
All I gotta say is we need more people like you in the prosecution world. So keep studying and join us on this side soon.
Exactly. Can't wait to have you on the team. So keep up the good work. And thanks to everybody who's been leaving reviews. At this point, I mean, we've gotten so many, it would be hard. It would take a whole episode to read them all. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to do that. I know it may seem like a very simple thing, but it's not.
But we will always read our favorite 1-star reviews because they make us feel so
absolutely.
warm and fuzzy inside.
I love 1-star reviews.
I do too.
Mean,
because
they're normally hilarious.
Because how much do you have to dislike us to take time out of your precious life to write a 1-star review?
We got a 3-star review recently.
That's the
Those
worst.
are depressing.
That's kind of
Those are the
like
worst.
like spitting lukewarm water into my mouth.
Ugh. That sounds
Exactly.
really gross.
It's just like, why'd you have to do that?
Yeah.
But it's okay,
Exactly.
3-star reviewer. I'm not hating. You are entitled to your opinion.
3-star reviewer. You need to pick a side. Get off the fence. It's either good or it's bad. One of the two. There's no gray area in podcasting. So
Bringing the heat.
Anyway, bringing the heat. So we've rambled for long enough at this point. Let's dive into this case. This is the case of Lois and Riess. And some of you are going to be familiar with this, but I think a lot of you probably aren't. This is a recent case. It's a case that's not covered very often because there's really no mystery here. This is not one of those cases where at the end of the day, we're going to go through our theories and aliens are the most likely. We know exactly what happened.
But Brett, we don't know why it happened. And that is the mystery.
We don't know why it happened. That is a mystery. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. But just to give you some idea, the people we're going to be talking about here, both the perpetrator of the crime and the two victims, are in their 50s, right? So these are people who have lived a full life, and all of a sudden, seemingly, what was an ordinary, normal life turned into violence. So, Alice, I don't know if you want to kick us off.
Certainly, because this is just such a bizarre story. I think you guys are going to like this. Like Brett said, this is the story of two women. The first, Lois Ann Riess. She was a 58-year-old mother of 3, a grandmother to 7 grandchildren. She was happily married. She had been a daycare operator while her husband farmed worms in rural Minnesota.
Can we just stop there for a second?
Please. So are there any worm farmers out there? Because I'd love to know how one farms worms. What I imagine is that worms grow themselves and you simply harvest them. But what does one do to encourage the growth and procreation of worms?
I mean, I have so many questions. I mean, basically, I have an unlimited number of questions. If there's somebody out there listening to this who is a worm farmer, we're going to have you on the show. I didn't realize, I mean, I guess I knew that you could buy worms.
You can certainly,
right?
You go to a bait shop and buy lots of worms, but here's the thing. You can buy a lot of worms for very little money. So you must need to, and I imagine these are free-range worms, that they're not, farmed in a tiny amount of spot. So you probably need a lot of land because they like to burrow. They like to,
right.
They like their space. And here's a question. How does one harvest them? Because I imagine, you've probably, I don't know, you're a country guy. When you dig up worms and you put like a shovel in the ground, sometimes you cut them in half. Now, sometimes that means you get 2 worms.
Well, then you get 2 worms.
You get 2 worms.
Don't they grow back?
But I think sometimes you have to cut them in the right places, right? You can't just cut them into infinite pieces because then we'd be in a world of hurt in this world. We'd have a lot of worms. But how do you get them out without cutting them all to pieces,
See, can you imagine if you were just walking across a field, maybe late at night, and you didn't realize that you had stumbled onto the worm farm, and then you notice that the ground is moving and you realize you're surrounded by millions of worms. It's like the middle of a horror movie,
That is
I don't know.
That is pretty terrifying. I just imagine a real, how they used to mine for gold? I imagine there's these big metal sieves and you pick it up and all the worms start moving, you shake it and all the dirt falls out and you're like, it's a good crop.
And I'm thinking that it's like a field of worms, but maybe they aren't cage-free worms. Maybe you grow worms in some sort of container. I mean, I don't know. I just don't know. This is beyond my expertise.
Okay, I promise last comment, because this is a very long aside about worms. This worm farm is also in Minnesota. Minnesota's really cold a lot of the year. I assume worms hibernate or freeze at some point. So it seems like the farming season is quite short in Minnesota for worms. So maybe you're right. Maybe they are grown in a greenhouse sort of thing.
Yeah, like I said, if there's anybody out there who is a worm expert, we were talking in one of our earlier episodes about how we didn't understand London and why there's all these little towns in London, and we got so many emails from people setting out how London's divided into 30-something different little boroughs or whatnot. So I'm expecting some similar emails about worms and how worms are farmed, and really just the economics of worm farming. I want to know how many worms you need to sell to make a living in today's worm market. I don't know what the worm futures were today. I didn't check the Chicago Board of Trade or anything, but I'm sure I'm sure it would be interesting to know. So I'm hoping someone will let us know. Sorry to interrupt.
No,
Alice.
no.
Please
So,
continue.
so I do think this actually sets the scene. We are talking about a small town, very pastoral life up in Minnesota. That's Lois and Riess's life. Then there's another woman. Her name is Stormy Liberty. She's an itinerant gambler. She's a fraudster and two-time murderer who led police on a chase across half of the United States. You know what's the craziest thing of all? Lois Ann Riess and Stormy Liberty, they're the same woman. You see, born in California, Lois Riess met her husband David while David was in the Navy. They were married in 1982, and after David finished his service, he and Lois moved back to the town of Blooming Prairie. And it was a picturesque village of 2,000 people where everybody knew everybody. They settled down, had 3 beautiful children, Bill, Braden, and Bria. And David got a job at a local manufacturing company. But David dreamed of more than just manufacturing. He was an outdoorsman, a hunter, and a fisherman, and his passion was actually worms. And I'm not laughing at that. Everyone has different passions, you know. And
yeah.
it seems like worm farming would at the very least, it would really cut the supply chain for his hobbies down so that he could fund his own hobbies.
There you go. You know, it's kind of like Amy Bechtel, right? She was an outdoors person, so she moved to this beautiful place in Wyoming where she could pursue her passion. And, you know, David had his own passion.
That's right.
It was worms. So, in any event, David, he followed that dream, that worm-ridden dream from the manufacturing facility to a job at a local bait shop. I kid you not. But even that wasn't enough for David. So in 2010, he bought some land outside of town and opened Prairie Wax Worm Farm. I don't know why it's wax worm. I don't know if that's the specific kind of worm or what, but that was the name of his farm. And for 8 years, David played the Dr. Byron McKeevy to Lois's Nan Wood. And if you don't know who that is, if you've ever seen American Gothic, those are the people in American Gothic. And that was the life they lived, a life close to the soil that the worms crawled through. But something wriggled in the darkness of Lois's heart. And it wasn't long before, for David, the worm had turned. See, Lois, she had a dark side. She liked to gamble. But unfortunately, she wasn't very good at it. Losing streak Lois is what the police would eventually come to call her, and she burned through thousands of dollars at Minnesota's casinos. And she needed a way to pay for it. And I guess, you know, worm farming, it may be lucrative enough to put food on the table, but maybe it's not lucrative enough to pay your thousands of dollars of gambling debts.
Well, hey, Brett, before you talk about how she continued her fraudster life, I hope that if I ever become an outlaw, that I have a cooler name than Losing Streak Lois.
Yeah.
It's kind of like hitting you when you're down, you know? Because she pretty much gives herself a great name. She gives herself the name of Stormy Liberty, which is kind of the opposite of Losing Streak Lois. I'm sorry. I just had to make a comment on that.
Stormy Liberty, it's either like a porn star or
a porn star.
I don't even know. You know? Stormy Liberty. I mean, I guess she's patriotic, so that's good. That's a good thing.
Maybe like a ship, like a ill-fated ship.
Ah,
Yeah. There you go.
Or a yacht.
Or a yacht.
That's a cute name for your boat, Stormy Liberty. But in any event, Lois had a way to pay her gambling debts because she had a guardianship, and this is awful. This begins to see the kind of person that Lois apparently was deep down inside. She had a guardianship over her disabled older sister, who was 61 years old at the time, but had the cognitive ability of a 10-year-old. Now, you might wonder how that made Lois lucky, but apparently her sister had some resources to draw from. And Lois was more than happy to take advantage of those resources. By the time she was caught, Lois had stolen enough money from her sister that in 2016, she was ordered to repay over $100,000 in restitution. And my understanding is that $100,000 went to paying some of those gambling debts and probably to accumulate a few more on top of that.
So that may make Lois a bad person, but that is incredibly bad, by the way. But I don't think anyone realized just how far she'd gone, Brett. You see, then March rolls around and something strange happened. David Riess, who had always been a conscientious businessman, stopped responding to messages. He wouldn't reply to his business partner or his employees, something that was unheard of for him. So now I
hate to interrupt again.
I was going to make a comment about farming, so go ahead.
The worm farm had both a business partner and employees? I'm trying to imagine what that wanted ad would look like, right? Needed. Strong hand for farm. You know?
Strong but delicate hands. Details. Strong but delicate hands.
Yeah, there you go.
Must like dirt.
Must like dirt.
I was actually going to say, I don't know, I think we've established quite clearly that we know nothing about worm farming, but generally farmers are very attending to their crop or stock. And so I wonder who's taking care of the worms. I'm worried about them.
The herd.
The herd. The employees.
Herd.
The herd. Okay, I'm sorry. So David, I mean, this is concerning because he is a conscientious businessman and people don't hear back from him when they start messaging him. And of course, naturally, they reach out to his wife, Lois, and Lois told the worried coworkers that David was sick and that they should not bother him. And then she said that he was going on a fishing trip. But it was when they got the messages from David that they got really worried. Because the messages from David included something strange, punctuation. David had never previously used punctuation in his texts, so that's when his friends and coworkers thought maybe something was up. And when officers from Dodge County Sheriff's Office arrived at the Riess home on March 23rd for a welfare check, they found David dead in the bathroom under a blanket, with towels pushed up against the door to keep in the smell of his rotting body. He'd been shot to death.
Lois would later tell police that she and David had gotten into a fight that day. Now, Lois said that she had attempted to kill herself before, and in his anger at this fight, and you wonder whether or not this fight might have been over her gambling debts, David had handed her a loaded pistol and told her to get it right this time. Instead, she turned the gun on him, shooting him in the chest. Lois stated that when she realized he was dead, she was so distraught that she laid down beside him in her grief, closed his eyes, and covered him in a blanket. In fact, she was so upset, she was so sad, she was so devastated over her husband's tragic death that she wrote $11,000 worth of checks from his business account, deposited them into her account, or his account, and then transferred the money to herself. As police were discovering her dead husband, she was at the Diamond Joe Casino in Northwood, Iowa, losing at slots. So I think that says a lot about Lois and her take on what happened that day.
And also, there's one thing. Let's compare this to the 911 call from the staircase, Michael Peterson, right? Whether you think he killed his wife or not, the portrayal, at least, was someone who is devastated and not knowing what they were doing. Here, she at least has her wherewithals. She has her wherewithals together enough to push towels up against the door so that the smell of his body doesn't get out. How long is she going to leave him in there?
as long as she could get away with it's what it sounds like to me. I mean, look, if you assume for a second that her sob story is true, and I think it's interesting that Lois to this day presents herself as a victim in this case. And as we continue, if you're not already convinced, I think you'll see that Lois is not a very nice person. But if that actually happened and you killed the love of your life in sort of this crazy moment, would you do this? Is this what you would do? Then you steal money from him and then go gamble some more? No, no. You would, be so distraught you would turn yourself in, or, you would call your children, something. But instead of doing all that, she just leaves her husband to rot and decay in the bathroom or whatever, and takes off with $11,000 she's managed to steal by forging some checks in his name and transferring the money over to her. And then it's not like she then goes on to try and start a new life somewhere. She shows up at the casino to continue doing what she had been doing, what had gotten her into trouble when she defrauded her sister in the first place. And I'm willing to bet that was a huge source of conflict in their marriage, that she continued to go to these casinos and she continued to spend all this money. But whatever the case, the police were after her now. And it would become a manhunt that would span states, span half the country, really. While police were looking for Lois in Minnesota and the surrounding environs, she was headed much further south, all the way to Fort Myers, Florida, which, if I'm right, is on the Gulf Coast of the peninsula. Is that right?
That
like Gulf Coast side of Orlando, I think. I think that's right. Somebody from Florida, write in and tell us how wrong we are.
It's on the coast.
But in any event, she's going to Florida. She's going to the beach, right? Because she's so distraught. She's so upset. And before Lois had become a Black Widow killer, some friends of hers, Tess and Rod Coster, had suggested that she and David should come to Florida sometime and see their house on the beach. They were snowbirds. They were the kind of folks who would spend at least half the year in Florida. And I kind of wonder if maybe Lois thought they had already come back to Minnesota because it was late March by this time. But in any event, on April 2nd, the Coster's daughter received a call from a woman calling herself Stormy Liberty, because that's a great alias and everybody would believe that. And she told the woman that she was a friend of her parents and she was looking for their house in Florida. That same day, Tess Coster looked outside her window to see a woman exiting a white Escalade in her driveway. When she stepped outside to speak to the woman, they locked eyes, and the other woman, whom she instantly recognized as Lois, mumbled something about having the wrong house and left. But at this point, Tess knew who had been standing in her drive, and she knew that Lois was wanted for murder, so she called the police.
And this is just so bizarre. We'll never know exactly why Lois showed up in the Coster's driveway, but it is interesting to note that Tess bears more than a passing resemblance to Lois.
And that will become significant very soon.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, Brett, that you just made, that maybe she thought that the Costers had already left to go back up to Minnesota, because why not call your friend, to find out her address? Well, I guess she's a wanted woman at this point.
But she doesn't necessarily know, right? I mean, it's unclear to me whether Lois knew at that point that the police had discovered David's body. I mean, it's possible she did, but she had taken some steps to conceal the death. Now, this is, a good 9 days later, so maybe
Right.
she did recognize that.
And here's another interesting thing, that what Lois does, right? Can you imagine showing up to someone who is your friend, who knows your face, and you guys lock eyes, and you pretend like you're not you? I wonder if you're in some different state of mind, I don't know what I would do. I would start laughing or something, you know, because it's so ridiculous for me to say, I lock eyes with you. I show up at your driveway and I just say, I must have the wrong house and leave, knowing full well that you know exactly who I am.
Yeah, it would be very strange.
But man, I won't do that to you, Brett.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad.
So she leaves the Costers' driveway, and then about 2 days later, on April 4th, Lois runs into Pamela Hutchinson at a restaurant in Fort Myers. And Pamela was staying in a condo, not but about a block from where the Costers were living. So apparently Lois hadn't gone far once she left the Costers' driveway.
Which I don't know how the police haven't found her yet. I mean,
Right.
that's sort of a weird thing about this, but
Maybe, yeah, I have no idea. She was living the good life on the beach. But Pamela and Lois bonded quickly, perhaps over the fact that they were strikingly similar in appearance. It's a mystery what exactly happened at that point, but what we know from surveillance videos is that the two of them went to Hutchinson's condo for about half an hour on April 4th. By the way, I think that's kind of bold. I guess Florida is a relatively friendly place, kind of the beach culture, but I'm not sure I would invite a stranger into a condo after meeting them for a couple hours.
no, I think it's weird, and it gets even weirder.
Yeah. So, you know, they're only there for about half an hour and then they leave. We don't know where they go. And then they come back to Pamela's room around 1 in the morning. So I guess they went out for a night on the town. And it's possible that Lois scammed her way into staying the night at Pamela's condo, but we don't really know. What we do know is the next day the two were seen at the Smokin' Oyster Brewery eating and drinking together. When they returned again to Hutchinson's room, Lois put her plan into action. So at this point, they seem like they've been hanging out pretty much nonstop for a day and a half, 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, Lois has really insinuated herself into this woman's life, and Hutchinson was only in town for, I think, a funeral or something. I think one of her friends' husbands had died, and she was down there for the funeral or whatnot. That was the only reason she was even in town, so she was not a local either.
I guess maybe one of those instances where you think you have found like a bosom buddy just for the purposes of the vacation and it's an intense friendship and then you guys will go your separate ways. I mean,
Yeah, I guess so.
that's still a lot though. I wouldn't invite someone to stay in my place, not knowing whether they're a murderer, as Lois was. So what we know next is the women were caught on camera returning to Pamela's room after dinner that second day. 45 minutes later, Lois leaves the room in a state that court documents would later describe as, quote, distraught, upset, and possibly crying, end quote. But she got over it quickly, and not long after, she returns to the room with an empty garbage bag. The next morning, so I guess she stays the night again, the camera catches Lois again, but this time the bag was full. But she didn't leave before calling the front desk and letting the condo know that Hutchinson would be extending her stay. On April 9th, an employee checking on some improperly functioning water pipes found Hutchinson dead, shot through the heart with a small caliber pistol.
And she'd done pretty much the same thing, the whole putting the towels up against the door to hide the smell. So she has like an MO at this point. And the weirdest thing about this to me is based on what I read and based on the articles that we're going to put on the website. If you read this, it really seems like she killed this woman and then she just spent the night with her body, right?
Yeah.
Like she's dead in the
weird.
bathroom or whatnot, and she just stays, fills the bag with as much of her stuff as she can, and then takes off.
And you know, after having spent like 2 days, they're eating every meal together, they're seen laughing together. That is like cold-blooded. I mean, of course she has killed
Oh,
her
yeah.
husband of decades as well, but man, to have that kind of pathology, ugh.
And remember, she tells us this sob story about killing her husband, right?
Right.
So, are we supposed to believe that something happened with Pamela? along the same lines.
And it's weird that she
Um,
kind of strikes up this friendship for multiple days because she had multiple opportunities where she was in the condo with her alone. In fact, just right after meeting her, where she could have effectuated her plan, and it probably wouldn't have changed anything in terms of if she was going to shoot the woman. She could have done it on the first day that she met her.
yeah, and I don't know if she just had to work herself up to it. I mean, maybe at that point she only killed one person, so maybe murdering someone was still something she found difficult to do. Um, you know, like I said, there's no great mystery about this case. She's going to plead guilty to this later on, and unfortunately, because she pleads guilty, there's just not a lot of information about what happened. We know the story that she told about David and her take on what happened there, but I could not find anything about what happened that night in Hutchinson's condo that led her to finally decide to kill her. I mean, I guess there's all sorts of things we could speculate about, right? I mean, maybe they flipped on the television and there was CNN or Fox News with her picture there, and it was a, well, shoot, I got to kill you now thing. Or maybe it just was. She was waiting for the right moment. This was the right moment, and she decided to strike, right? I mean, the fact that she was at least a little upset about it tells you that, if nothing else, it was something that wasn't purely cold-blooded. It at least took a little bit of effort for her to kill this woman. I guess if you want to give her that. But it didn't take her long to get past her emotions. As we said, she filled up the bag with some of her stuff, and then she stole Hutchinson's car, swung by the bank where she withdrew $5,000 from her account. As we pointed out earlier, they looked a lot alike. Now, they're sometimes described as doppelgangers. I think that is a little bit of an overstatement. They don't look exactly alike. Pamela was a few years older than Lois. I think Lois was a little bit more heavy set than Pamela, but it's like anything else, right? You got a driver's license that kind of looks like you show it to a bank rep, they're not going to give it a second look. So she shows up at this bank and coolly takes out $5,000, and now all of a sudden she's back in the money. And she must know she can't stay in Florida. So she heads out again and drives from Florida across Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana all the way to Texas. Her luck turns a little bit for her, though. She stops at a Louisiana casino and actually wins a $1,500 jackpot. So she's got that as well. And for 10 days, she's eluding police once again. She arrives in South Padre Island, which I don't know exactly where South Padre Island is. Do you know where that is?
Of course I do. I'm from Texas. It's along the
course you
Gulf
do.
Coast. It is a spring break destination place as well as a family vacation place.
Oh, nice.
Well, it's
Nice.
actually currently being hit by the hurricane, I believe. So I hope it's
Mm.
okay. But it's a very nice
Sorry
beach.
to all our fans down there. Praying for you guys. Take care of yourselves. I know that is happening as we record this.
Yes,
So hopefully, by
special
the time
shout
you're
out.
hearing it, things will have gone better than a lot of people think they're going to go. But
Absolutely.
in any event, she was there, South Padre Island, and she makes friends. I mean, she must be a really friendly person. She must be somebody who really can connect with people quickly, because she makes friends with another lady, Bernadette Mathis, at a restaurant where Bernadette was dining alone. And I think we talked about serial killers and how they're predators and they're looking for prey and they recognize weakness. And I think Lois, she sees this woman in Florida who is not a local. She's there for a funeral. I'm sure her friends didn't feel like going out with her because they were probably mourning. So she's alone. And Lois is able to sort of zoom in on that. She recognizes that weakness, and it seems like she did the same thing with Bernadette. Bernadette's at this restaurant. She's eating alone. I think she could tell this is somebody who probably needs a friend, and I'll be that friend. So she makes friends with her, and then, she works fast because she ends up spending that night in Bernadette's guest room, and the two have breakfast the next morning. And this blows my mind. It blows my mind that
And
she
she can do
managed to
this
convince
twice.
two different women. I know.
I guess the thing is, if you look at her picture, I mean, she does just look like a nice grandma. I can't imagine her having just killed two people in cold-blooded murder.
No. This is definitely don't judge a
But
book
still,
by its cover. Come
I
on.
would not invite, the barefoot Contessa, someone who looked like the barefoot Contessa, into my guest bedroom for the night.
No, neither would I. But she does, and so she spends the night in the guest room. They have breakfast, and they make plans to meet. And that day, Lois texts Bernadette, bragged about my new friend. Be good and safe. I want to hang out soon. And so Lois heads to a seaside bar. She's drinking cocktails and chatting with a couple men who are there at the bar when an employee recognizes her from the media coverage and calls the police. And she hasn't quite finished her drink before U.S. Marshals arrive and arrest her. And they arrest her before Bernadette could get there. And you just have to wonder, if that employee had not recognized Lois, would Bernadette have been her next victim? And I think the answer is almost certainly yes. I tried to find out what cocktail she was drinking. I spent a lot of time actually trying to find out what cocktail she was drinking, and I could not
You
find
thought
it
she
out.
was like trying to be ironic, and it was some like pun about murders or guns.
Exactly. And what would be a good, like murder at sunset or something like that.
Well, it was in Texas, so it probably did have some pun with a gun.
Yeah, it was probably a margarita, but who can say for sure? So when the police did search her belongings, they found a 9mm and a .22 caliber handgun and a black bag with bullets, a holster, duct tape, rubber gloves, and a checkbook of one of her victims with 4 credit cards. So she definitely had, a little kill kit there ready to go. She was charged with multiple counts, including all the sort of bank fraud, the little things, and 2 counts of capital murder. Capital murder means that she would be eligible for the death penalty. I'm not sure. I think Minnesota has the death penalty, but I'm not sure. Florida certainly does.
Yeah, I was going to ask where she was charged, since the
She was
murders
charged
happened
in
in
both
2
Florida
different.
and Minnesota. Yeah. And she eventually pleaded guilty to avoid the possibility of the death penalty. At her sentencing, she expressed remorse for her crime, saying, "What I did was an unpardonable crime. Solitude is forever. I feel I deserve this. I will have no reprieve." And that is true. In exchange for pleading guilty, she might have taken the death penalty off the table, but she is in jail for the rest of her life.
We haven't even talked about her family, who they probably were a very typical family, right? With her 3 kids and many grandchildren. I wonder what they were thinking through this whole time when she was evading the police across the country. And she operated a daycare. Our children go to
Yeah.
daycares.
And her kids spoke at her sentencing, and they were, as shocked and could not understand it as you are. I mean, they said things like they didn't understand why she would do this, why she took their father away from them, and now they've lost their mother too. I mean, it's a real look. We've had a lot of fun with this story, and the story is crazy and in parts hilarious, but it is a tragedy. I mean, she like sowed destruction for those few days while she was on the run. She killed the father of her children and the grandfather of her grandkids. She killed this innocent woman who also had a family. And look, she was going to kill this other woman. I mean, my feeling on Lois was until she was stopped, she was going to keep befriending people, murdering them, and stealing from them, and driving across the country. She might have hit all 50 states before it was over.
Right.
I guess it would have been tough to get to Hawaii, but I mean, yeah, she wasn't going to stop. She
And,
was going to kill.
I'm going to throw a question out there and then go into the timeline because I think it goes to my question. My question is, Lois lived the Lois Riess life for seemingly about 58 years. And then all of a sudden, Stormy Liberty makes an appearance seemingly quickly. Did she snap one day at age 58? Or had this always been who she was, brimming at just below the surface? And She couldn't hide it any longer. She was tired of suppressing the real her. Now, I'm going to read the timeline so you can see what I mean, how quickly this all went down. So, Lois leads seemingly a normal, non-criminal life for 50 plus years. Now, we did talk about how she stole money from her disabled sister. But in March 11th, 2018, her daughter reports seeing her father for the last time. And that day, according to Lois, she and David got into a fight and she shot him to death. April 2nd, Lois is in Florida at the Costers. April 4th, Lois meets Pamela Hutchinson. April 5th, Lois murders Hutchinson. April 19th, Lois is arrested in Texas. So her evasion of police across the country and 2 murders happen within the span of just over 1 month, when previously she had no criminal history. What do you think, Brett? Did she snap one day, or is this always who she was? Or, I'll throw in a third one. Was she suffering from a very extreme case of gambling addiction?
I think it's the latter. Look, we don't really know anything about Lois beyond the sort of last couple years of her life, where she did seem to turn from a stereotypical grandmother to a master criminal, right? And the thing that seems to that connects her crime, where she defrauded her sister, that connects her murdering her husband to murdering Pamela Hutchinson, is gambling and gambling debts and the need for money to do that. And, it is such a good question. It is such a good question whether or not this was just who she always was, or if this was a result of, something else.
And it's an interesting question because any of us could be Lois, right? I mean, she's seemingly not that special. She lived a humble life, a hardworking life, seemingly. She raised kids who seemed to be non-criminals. And she all of a sudden turns into this. Or are we all susceptible to this? Did something else drive it? Were there signs that people missed other than just defrauding her sister? Which, again, it's not good, but it's also not obvious as someone who feeds a gambling problem by taking money from a disabled sister will then go on to murder 2 people.
I mean, they always say that the sort of one of the connecting threads for psychopaths is they see people as ends or means to an end, right? So, good people see people as ends. You're supposed to, be kind and want to help people and all this other stuff. You don't want to use people. You're not trying to use people to reach your own end. But when it comes to her, if you look at what she did, that's what she was doing. She had a sister who she could use as a means to pay off her gambling debts. She killed her husband, and apparently so she could get more money to gamble. She killed Hutchinson so she could take her identity, steal her car, and get money so she could head to Texas, and she was going to do it again. And I think the thing that makes me think this was always in her and this was who she was is it would be one thing if she had killed her husband. Obviously, you shouldn't kill your husband. It's bad to kill your husband, but, you never know what's going on in domestic life, right? I mean, who knows exactly what was going on with them. And if she had just killed him, that would be one thing. If she just killed him and then led police on a multi-state chase where she spent the money at various casinos, that would be one thing. But for her to murder a completely innocent, unrelated person and then to target another person, apparently to murder them as well, to me, that just elevates this so much from the gambling thing.
And you're right about that because there's there's something else at play. So she murders these people and can seemingly carry on conversations and laugh with others and strike up friendships as if nothing had happened. There is no pall over her. There's no cloud over her whatsoever.
Even that's just not normal.
No, not at all. Even in our most hardened criminals that we deal with, we see remorse. She has an absolute lack of remorse. And even if she shows remorse at her sentencing later, she certainly doesn't show it in the days after the murders when she is still scot-free, right?
Right.
So I agree with you that it's probably there.
Yeah, I think it was always there. I think it had to be, and I would be interested to know more about her history, because the weirdest thing about this is most people don't start committing these kind of crimes in their 50s, right?
Right.
They start a lot earlier than that. And so maybe, it was the gambling in that she had never needed to do something like this, and the gambling sort of gave her an excuse. But it was always there in her to do this kind of stuff. We talked about the kids. I'll just read a couple things they said. Her daughter said, "I cycle between anger, regret, and sadness. March 11th, 2018 was the last time I hugged my dad and told him I loved him. I miss my dad more than words can describe." Her son, Billy, said, "You just left. We had nobody. It'll take a lot for me to talk and see you ever again. There's no excuse for it." And can't argue with either one of those sentiments.
Right. And like you said, the gambling may have given her a reason to really blossom into the person she was, in a negative sense. But I wonder if in her life she had done other insidious things that were just not to the level of criminality.
Yeah, I mean, I bet she was stealing from that daycare. I mean, I bet she was committing all sorts of pettier, maybe not petty crimes necessarily, but small time crimes. I don't think somebody like that. She obviously has no regard for other people. I can't imagine she has much regard for the law other than not wanting to get arrested. And I think if she had the opportunity to enrich herself at someone else's expense, she would have done that just like she did with her sister. So there's not a whole lot of, weird things. We all talk about weird things or sort of prosecutorial angles or whatnot. But there is one thing I wanted to bring up, which I think is really interesting, and that's the death penalty as a bargaining chip. So a lot of you guys are probably anti-death penalty. A lot of you are probably pro-death penalty. But one thing I often wonder if people think about, and this is not necessarily a reason to keep the death penalty, but it's an interesting thing. It's the death penalty is a bargaining chip. So in this case, and really famously in the Golden State Killer case, because of the death penalty, because the death penalty was on the table, the person who had been charged had something to bargain about. And let me explain that. So take the Golden State Killer. Golden State Killer killed, 11 people, I think, maybe more than that. He raped untold more. Many of those rapes were beyond the statute of limitations. California has the death penalty. Now, they never use it, so I don't know why this turned out to be such a valuable bargaining chip. But when California took the death penalty off the table, he was willing to plead guilty to all those murders, to all those rapes, and in fact, to admit culpability for even the rapes where the statute of limitations had passed. If there had been no death penalty, someone like the Golden State Killer would have no reason not to roll the dice, right? If he pleads guilty, he's going to get life in jail. If he goes to trial, who knows? Maybe he lucks out somehow and gets off. Same thing for Lois. If she's facing 2 murder charges, she's going to go to jail for the rest of her life. If there's no death penalty, then go ahead, roll the dice. Maybe you can convince a jury that your husband was abusive, and that was the only reason that you killed him. And maybe you convince a jury that Pamela struggled with the gun because she found out about that and she tried to kill her, and she was acting in self-defense there as well. Not likely, but it's possible. And it certainly would have put her kids and the families, the victims, through a lot. So the fact that the death penalty was on the table enabled these prosecutors in both those cases to reach a conclusion where the victims and their families were able to get some closure, and the person on the other side had something they could gain where they had life in prison rather than the death penalty.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brett. And what's interesting about the death penalty as a bargaining chip is that the way our death penalty, and it's typically when we talk about death penalty, it's typically at the state level. There is federal death penalty, but it's very rarely used for a number of reasons we can go into later if you guys are interested. But the thing with death penalty is there are more resources and constitutional protections in place for all of the habeas proceedings and appeals that you are entitled to after, if you were to have the death penalty imposed on you. And you aren't entitled to any of that when you plea, because typically you waive any sort of appeals when you plea. So, I mean, being dragged through continuous litigation until the day of your death is also a different kind of punishment. So people, often and rationally choose not to do that. But it is interesting because of how long it takes to actually execute someone in most states, that you may be on death row for about as long as you would be with a life without parole sentence.
And it gives the victims some sort of immediate closure. I mean, a lot of victims want to see the death penalty. They want to see the person who killed their family member executed. But I think if you asked them afterwards, the fact that they do have to go through these endless rounds of appeals, just appeal after appeal after appeal after appeal, even when somebody is very obviously guilty and very obviously did it, somebody like Lois still would have gone through 10 years of appeals before she could actually be executed. And it's like this sort of constant torture for the families of the victims to have to watch that and wonder, is this ever going to actually happen? The good thing about Lois is she's like rotting away in a prison somewhere, and it's over. It's over for the family. They don't have to worry about any of those appeals. They don't have to worry about her ever getting out. She's just gone. As somebody said about the Golden State Killer, she just disappears into obscurity. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and to give you an example of just how long these appeals can go on, and how long it takes to actually execute someone on death row, I have a family member who was actually a witness in a trial that resulted in the death penalty being imposed. Typically,
That's
she
just
did not.
everybody in Texas, right?
Yeah, that's
Something.
exactly. This did take place in Texas. My family member did not know that she was a witness in a death penalty trial. Typically, it depends what state you're in, but oftentimes there's the trial phase and then the penalty phase, and death penalty may not be known to the people involved in the first trial. So she was just she had been working at a bank, and this guy had robbed her because she was the teller, and he then went on to murder several people. And so she was just pointing out who had robbed her. She didn't know that he had murdered anyone, anything like that. And ultimately, at the end of it, the trial lasted for a long time. This was years after she'd been robbed. She found out in the news that he had actually gotten the death penalty. 20 years later, he is still appealing, and she follows it closely because she is very scared that he may get out and come after her, since she was the only witness on the prosecution side who pointed to him in court. I don't think
That
he's
is
going to get off.
interesting.
But
No,
just to show you, I
probably
mean, this is
not.
20 years later, and he's still appealing, and he still has appeal rights. Usually you run out of appeals, and you do reach the end of your appeal rights in death penalty, but not as quickly as if you just went through a typical criminal case with a sentence that wasn't the death penalty.
Right. And like I said, I know the death penalty is controversial, so probably hear a lot of thoughts on that. Always look forward to hearing those things from you guys. That's the story, essentially, of Lois Riess, though.
That's
She's
right.
serving the rest of her life in prison, and good riddance is my view on that. But in any event, like I said, you guys are going to have thoughts, questions, comments. You can hit us up at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Prosecutorspod on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And then prosecutorspodcast.com is our website. And we love hearing from you guys, and we try to respond whenever we can. So please do that. Let us know what you're thinking. I do want to point out, for those of you who are living in Islington, you guys have fallen behind. Atlanta has charged the front, thinking maybe Cheryl McCollum is spreading the good word down there. So, London, you got to pick it up. Got to start telling friends. to listen to the show and get London back on top. But we'll keep you guys informed about how that's going. All right. Well, guys, we will be back next week with a new case, new questions, and new answers. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
The pressure's on now.
This whole story is so ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Today on The Prosecutors, we investigate the crime spree of Lois.
Lois.
Lois?
Lois.
Lois.
She didn't do a sex change that I know
Lois. Okay. Just love the word.
of. Worm farmer. Like, that's awesome. How does one farm worms, anyway?
I don't actually know.
Like,
We should discuss that.
yeah, we should. I mean, I think
We're
it's
gonna have to, like-
fascinating.
Yeah, he was worm food at that point. Sorry. I know that's terrible. Anyways,